25 most beautiful black actresses you can't recognize today as of 2026. Once they were the faces that stopped Hollywood in its tracks, the women audiences admired, desired, and never forgot. But time, heartbreak, scandal, reinvention, and survival changed them in ways few people saw coming. Some of these black screen legends still carry the same magnetic presence. Others look so different today that even longtime fans might do a double take. In this video, we're revisiting 25 of the most beautiful black actresses of their era to see what fame, pain, and the passing of time really left behind. Stay until the end, because some of these transformations are far more shocking than anyone expected. Subscribe to Black Legends Revealed. Halle Berry. In her prime, Halle Berry did not just look like a movie star, she looked like the definition of one. By the early 2000s, she had become one of the most recognizable women in Hollywood, and in 2002, she made history as the first black woman to win the Academy Award for Best Actress for Monsters Ball. For many people, that image never faded. Halle Berry at her peak, elegant, radiant, and seemingly untouchable. But that is exactly why she fits this title so powerfully. The woman the world remembers from that era is not the same public figure standing before us now. After the Oscar, Berry seemed destined to rule Hollywood for years, yet Catwoman became a major setback, earning about $82.4 million worldwide against a reported $100 million budget. Berry later reflected that the industry and the public turned that failure into a defining moment in a way that followed her for years. When you think of Halle Berry, do you still picture the woman from that Oscar night first? That question gets to the heart of her transformation. As of 2026, Halle Berry no longer carries herself like someone trying to preserve an old fantasy. She has spoken openly about the fact that her Oscar did not change her career the way people imagine, and in recent years she has stepped into a more grounded, authoritative phase of public life. She served on the Cannes jury in 2025, and the glamour is still there, but now it comes with something deeper: confidence shaped by survival, not approval. That is why some fans may feel they can't recognize Halle Berry today. She is still striking. She is simply no longer frozen in the version the world first fell in love with. Angela Bassett. In the 1990s, Angela Bassett did not just look beautiful, she looked powerful. Her beauty came with forced discipline and a kind of authority that made her impossible to ignore. That image reached another level when she played Tina Turner in What's Love Got to Do with It, earning her a first Oscar nomination and turning her into one of the most unforgettable black actresses of her generation. For many viewers, that is still the version of Angela Bassett. They see first fierce, glamorous, and rising fast. Angela Bassett's performance in What's Love Got to Do with It earned her a Best Actress Oscar nomination, and later her role in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever made her the first actor nominated for an Oscar for a Marvel film. When you think of Angela Bassett, do you still picture the Tina Turner era first? That question matters because the woman audiences see today carries a very different kind of presence. As of 2026, Bassett feels less like a star still proving herself and more like a figure of stature, someone who has moved beyond glamour into legacy. Her role as Queen Ramonda in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever gave her a new kind of cultural weight, and receiving an honorary Oscar in 2024 confirmed that Hollywood now sees her as part of its permanent history. More recently, she has taken on presidential roles in Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning, and Zero Day, which only reinforces how her image has evolved, no longer simply alluring, but commanding. That is why some fans may feel they can't recognize Angela Bassett today. Not because she changed beyond recognition, but because the energy around her has changed. The beauty is still there, but now it arrives with the gravity of a woman who already knows she belongs. Nia Long. For a certain generation, Nia Long was the face of effortless 1990s beauty. She had that rare combination of softness and confidence that made her unforgettable in films like Boys End, The Hood Loved Jones, and The Best Man. She did not look manufactured. She looked natural. warm and impossibly self-assured, the kind of woman audiences remembered long after the movie ended. That is the image many people still carry when they hear her name. What changed was not only time, it was exposure. In 2022, her long relationship with Ime Udoka collapsed in public after reports of his workplace affair and suspension from the Boston Celtics. Long later called the experience a gut punch, and in 2023 described the breakup as a wake-up call that forced her to put herself first. The woman the public once knew as a quietly glamorous screen presence suddenly appeared in a very different light, not as fantasy, but as someone navigating humiliation, heartbreak, and recovery in front of the world. When you picture Nia Long, now do you still see the 90s screen siren first? Maybe that is why she feels so different today. As of 2026, Long seems less like a woman being watched and more like one choosing her own pace. She has spoken about finding peace in co-parenting, and her role as Katherine Jackson in the upcoming Michael biopic points to a more mature phase of her career, one rooted in grace rather than youthful mystique. She is still striking, but the energy has shifted. The Nia Long of today feels steadier, more inward, and harder to define by the old image alone. Vanessa Williams. In the 1980s, Vanessa Williams looked like a new kind of American fairy tale when she became the first black woman crowned Miss America. In 1983, she was instantly framed as beauty, grace, and progress all at once. Then came the scandal that seemed ready to define her forever. Nude photos from an old shoot surfaced, and under crushing pressure, she resigned her crown in 1984. Decades later, the Miss America organization publicly apologized to her on live television, acknowledging how unfairly she had been treated. That arc alone helps explain why Vanessa Williams fits this title so well. The woman the public first saw as a beauty queen became, over time, something much more complex and much harder to reduce to one image. When you picture Vanessa Williams, do you still see the pageant winner first? That question matters, because the Vanessa Williams of today is not trying to preserve that old picture. In a 2024 interview, she said she does not use fillers, no longer does Botox, and has not had a facelift because she wants to look like myself. That choice says a great deal. Many stars try to freeze time. Vanessa Williams seems more interested in wearing time well. And as of 2025, she was starring in London's West End production of The Devil Wears Prada as Miranda Priestley, a role built less on youthful beauty than on presence, authority, and style. That is why some viewers may feel they can't recognize Vanessa Williams today. Not because she disappeared, and not because her beauty faded, but because it matured into something more commanding. The young woman once judged by a crown and a scandal now carries herself with the confidence of someone who outlasted both. And that transformation may be more impressive than the original image ever was. Queen Latifah. In the 1990s, Queen Latifah carried a kind of beauty that did not fit the narrow mold Hollywood usually rewarded. She was regal, self-assured, and completely original, a woman whose appeal came from presence as much as appearance. As her acting career expanded through Living Single, Set It Off, and later Chicago, the public began to see her not just as a rap pioneer, but as one of the most magnetic black actresses on screen. For many viewers, that is still the image they hold: bold, glamorous, and larger than life. But Queen Latifah of today feels different in a way that goes far beyond looks. Part of that change came from loss. In 1992, her brother Lancelot Jr. was killed in a motorcycle accident, a tragedy she has spoken about as one of the deepest wounds of her life. It is the kind of grief that alters a person's energy forever. When you picture Queen Latifah, now, do you still see the fearless icon from the early years first? That question matters, because as of 2026, she no longer projects the same kind of youthful force the public first fell in love with. Instead, she carries something calmer and heavier: authority. In recent years, she fronted The Equalizer for 5 seasons before the series ended in 2025. And she has spoken openly about entering menopause, describing it as frightening at first, but ultimately empowering. That is why some viewers may feel they can't recognize Queen Latifah today. Not because she lost what made her special, but because time transformed her from a symbol of fearless cool into something more grounded and lasting. The beauty is still there. It simply arrives now with wisdom, stillness, and the unmistakable weight of a woman who has lived through enough to no longer perform for anyone. Whoopi Goldberg. In the 1980s and 1990s, Whoopi Goldberg did not look like anyone else in Hollywood, and that was exactly her power. She was not introduced to the world as a conventional glamour star. She arrived with wit edge and a face audiences instantly remembered. The color purple made her impossible to ignore. Ghost turned her into an Oscar winner, and over time she became the first black woman to achieve EGOT status. For many viewers, the Whoopi they still picture first is the fearless performer. From those years, sharp, unpredictable, and completely original. What makes her fit this title so well is that the public image attached to Whoopi Goldberg today feels radically different from the woman many people first fell in love with on screen. She is no longer defined mainly by film roles. She has spent years as a co-host and moderator on The View, where her presence is less cinematic and more institutional part. Commentator, part cultural referee, part elder stateswoman of daytime television. She also made history as the first woman to host the Oscars solo in 1994, and remains the only woman to have hosted the ceremony 4 times, which says a great deal about how fully she moved from actress to public figure. When you think of Whoopi Goldberg, do you still see the movie star first, or the voice she became later? That question is the heart of her transformation. By 2025, people was already reflecting on her at 70, and recent interviews show a woman far less interested in pleasing the public than in speaking plainly and living on her own terms. That is why some viewers may feel they can't recognize Whoopi Goldberg today. Not because she disappeared, but because the version the world remembers from the movies evolved into someone bigger than a screen image, a permanent cultural presence. Regina King. In the 1990s, Regina King had a kind of beauty that felt effortless, warm, modern, and completely real. She was not introduced to audiences as a distant fantasy. She was the woman you noticed because she felt alive on screen. From Boys in the Hood to Jerry Maguire, and later If Beale Street Could Talk. Her image carried both softness and strength, and by 2019 that journey reached its peak when she won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. For many viewers, that is still the Regina King frozen in memory, poised, luminous, and fully in command. But Regina King fits this title because the woman people see today carries a very different emotional weight. In January 2022, her only son, Ian Alexander Jr., died by suicide at age 26. Since then, King has spoken openly about how grief changed her, saying she is a different person now, and more recently explaining that she lives more in the moment and still thinks of him constantly. That kind of loss does not simply change a life. It changes a face, a presence, even the silence around a person. When you picture Regina King now, do you still see the old Hollywood glow first, or the quiet strength that came after the pain? That is why some viewers may feel they can't recognize her today. Not because her beauty disappeared, but because sorrow reshaped the energy the public once knew. As of 2026, Regina King is still a woman of immense stature. She starred as Shirley Chisholm in Shirley in 2024 and appeared in Caught Stealing in 2025. But the image now feels deeper, more inward, and more lived in. She no longer reads only as a star at the height of her powers. She reads as a woman who has carried unbearable grief and kept moving anyway. And that transformation may be one of the most profound on this list. Gabrielle Union. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Gabrielle Union had the kind of beauty Hollywood instantly knew how to frame: bright smile, sharp features, effortless confidence, and the screen presence that made her stand out even in ensemble casts. Films like Bring It On helped lock her into public memory as one of the most recognizable black actresses of that era, polished, youthful, and easy to picture as the glamorous woman audiences thought they knew. But that frozen image only tells part of the story. Over time, Union became known for something far deeper than the version people first met on screen. What changed her public image was not simply age, but candor. Union has spoken openly for years about surviving sexual assault as a young woman, and about the PTSD that continued to affect her long after the crime itself. That honesty altered the way many people saw her. She was no longer just a beauty from beloved films. She became a woman whose face carried survival advocacy and emotional truth. In recent years, that transformation has only deepened as she has spoken more about self-care boundaries and building a life that starts with herself rather than public approval. When you picture Gabrielle Union today, do you still see the Bring It On version first? That question is exactly why she fits this title. As of 2026, Union still looks striking, but the image now feels more self-directed and much less defined by Hollywood fantasy. She has expanded into entrepreneurship through her hair care work and was honored by Variety in 2025 with its Entrepreneur Impact Award, a sign that her identity now reaches well beyond acting alone. That is why some viewers may feel they can't recognize Gabrielle Union today. The beauty is still there, but now it is paired with authority, vulnerability, and the unmistakable presence of a woman who decided to define herself on her own terms. Taraji P. Henson. In the late 1990s and 2000s, Taraji P. Henson had the kind of beauty Hollywood could not ignore. Warm, sensual, playful, and immediately alive on screen. From Baby Boy to Hustle and Flow. And then the curious case of Benjamin Button. She built an image that felt both glamorous and grounded, never distant, never artificial. By the time Empire turned Cookie Lion into a phenomenon, Taraji was no longer just admired. She had become one of the most recognizable black actresses in America. That was the version many viewers locked into memory, bold, magnetic, and full of motion. What changed that image was not one scandal or one career crash, but a deeper kind of exposure. Over the years, Henson has spoken openly about depression, anxiety, and the emotional weight she carried for far too long, saying in 2019 that she suffers from depression, and later explaining that she wanted to break the cycle of suffering around mental health in Black communities. She also founded the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation in honor of her father turning private pain into public advocacy. When you picture Taraji now, do you still see the old Hollywood bombshell first? That question is exactly why she belongs on this list. As of 2026, Taraji P. Henson still looks striking, but the energy around her feels very different. She now carries herself less like a rising screen siren and more like a woman who has lived, endured, and chosen purpose over image. Her 2025 film work, her 2025 NAACP Image Awards recognition, and her 2026 movie to Broadway and Joe Turner's Come and Gone all point to a public figure whose identity has widened far beyond what audiences first saw. That is why some viewers may feel they can't recognize Taraji today. The beauty never disappeared. It simply matured into something heavier, wiser, and far more intentional. Robin Givens. In the late 1980s, Robin Givens looked like the kind of actress Hollywood was built to celebrate. On Head of the Class, she had elegance, poise, and the sort of polished beauty that fit perfectly with the era's idea of a rising screen star. She was young, striking, and very easy for the public to place inside a familiar fantasy, the sophisticated Black actress on the edge of something even bigger. That image, however, did not last untouched for long. What changed everything was not time, at first, but scrutiny. Her brief marriage to Mike Tyson in 1988 turned her from an actress into a spectacle. The Barbara Walters interview, in which Givens spoke in haunting terms about abused women and what it felt like to stay in a damaging relationship, permanently altered the way the public viewed her. A week later, she filed for divorce. Instead of being seen simply as a talented woman in pain, she was attacked by many in the press and reduced to tabloid shorthand. In other words, the version of Robin Givens that millions remember was shaped as much by public cruelty as by Hollywood glamour. When you picture Robin Givens now, do you still see the headline or the woman behind it? That question matters because the Robin Givens of today carries herself very differently from the image frozen in popular memory. She has continued acting reflected publicly on survival and faith, and lived long enough to outlast the caricature once forced onto her. Even the way she appears now feels different, less like a woman being looked at, more like one who has learned how to look back. So if some viewers feel they barely recognize Robin Givens today, it may be because the old public story was never the full one to begin with. Monique. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Monique brought a very different kind of screen appeal to Hollywood. She was funny, flirtatious, and unmistakably herself, especially on The Parkers, where she turned broad comedy into real star power. At a time when the industry often narrowed black women into one image of beauty, Monique's magnetism came from boldness, confidence, and the feeling that she was fully in on the joke while still commanding the frame. Then Precious changed everything. Her performance was devastating, intimate, and impossible to shake, and it won her the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in 2010. What followed, however, reshaped how the public saw her. Instead of gliding into a smooth post-Oscar era, Monique spent years speaking openly about being pushed to the margins after refusing to play the game the way the industry expected. Her dispute with Netflix over a low offer for a comedy special became public, and the company later settled her discrimination lawsuit in 2022. Around that same time, Lee Daniels publicly apologized, and she rejoined him for The Deliverance in 2024. When you think of Monique now, do you still see the sitcom star first, or the woman who refused to stay quiet? That is what makes her so striking today. By 2026, Monique no longer reads as the bubbly comic persona many people remember. She comes across as harder, steadier, and far more battle-tested, a woman whose face now carries not just humor, but defiance. Kerry Washington. Before she became a symbol of power on television, Kerry Washington was the kind of actress people often underestimated at first glance. In films like Save the Last Dance Ray and The Last King of Scotland, she brought elegance, intelligence, and a polished kind of beauty that felt refined rather than flashy. Then Scandal changed everything, as Olivia Pope Washington became the first black woman in nearly 4 decades to lead a network TV drama in the United States. And suddenly the woman many viewers once saw as quietly beautiful became a cultural force in white coats and perfect control. The version of Kerry Washington the public sees now feels much more exposed and much more inward. Her 2023 memoir, Thicker Than Water, changed the tone around her completely. In it, she revealed private truths she had kept hidden for years, including childhood trauma, panic attacks, and eating disorder, and learning in adulthood that the man who raised her was not her biological father. Those revelations did not damage her image, they altered it. The old mystery gave way to candor. The perfect composure people associated with her began to look different once they understood how much she had carried underneath it. When you think of Kerry Washington today, do you still see Olivia Pope first? Maybe that is the real transformation. As of 2026, Washington still has the same striking features and unmistakable poise, but the woman standing in front of the camera now seems less guarded, more grounded, and far less interested in being anyone's polished fantasy. With new work like Apple TV Plus's Imperfect Women and a public life shaped more by truth and mystery, she no longer feels frozen in the sleek image that once made her famous. She feels fuller than that and far more human. Jada Pinkett Smith. In the 1990s, Jada Pinkett Smith had a look Hollywood rarely knew what to do with: petite, sharp-featured, intense, and impossible to mistake for anyone else. In films like Set It Off Woo and later The Matrix sequels, her appeal came from edge rather than softness. She did not arrive as a traditional screen siren. She looked quick, modern, and slightly dangerous, the kind of woman who made beauty feel restless instead of polished. For many viewers, that is still the Jada frozen in memory. Youthful, magnetic, and always moving at full speed. The version the public sees now feels very different, and not mainly because of age. What altered her image was revelation. In 2023, while promoting her memoir, worthy Jada said she and Will Smith had actually been separated since 2016. That disclosure changed the way people looked back at years of public appearances, the 2022 Oscars incident, and even the old idea of them as an unshakable couple. Around the same time, her book pushed her image even further away from mystery and into radical self-exposure. The woman once read as cool and elusive suddenly became someone the public associated with confession, vulnerability, and uncomfortable honesty. When you picture Jada now, do you still see the fierce actress from the Set It Off years first? That question captures the shift. As of 2026, Jada Pinkett Smith no longer feels defined by the sleek aura that first made her stand out. She is now tied just as strongly to memoir family complexity and public truth-telling as she is to film. And with Netflix's newly announced A Different World sequel bringing her back as Lena James, the contrast becomes even sharper. The girl people remember is returning, but the woman behind her has changed completely. Vivica A. Fox. In the mid-1990s, Vivica A. Fox had the kind of screen appeal that felt fast, bright, and unmistakably glamorous. Independence Day made her widely recognizable. Set It Off gave her edge, and Kill Bill later proved she could carry danger as easily as style. Back then, her image was all movement, glossy hair, sharp outfits, a fearless smile, and the energy of a woman who seemed made for the camera. That is the version many viewers still remember first. What makes her feel different today is not that the glamour vanished. It is that the glamour now comes with experience. In recent interviews, Fox has looked back on earlier roles with the authority of someone who knows exactly what she contributed, even revealing that on Toucan Play That Game she paid for much of her own wardrobe because she knew how she wanted her character to appear. That detail says a lot. The old image was beauty and charisma. The newer image is authorship. When you picture Vivica now, do you still see the 90s bombshell first? As of 2026, Fox still turns up polished and camera-ready, but she reads less like a fantasy figure and more like a woman fully in command of her brand. She has spoken about fashion, aging, fitness, and visibility with a confidence that feels earned, not performed. She even launched a fashion collaboration with HSN and continues to show up across film, television, and live events. So if some viewers feel they barely recognize Vivica A. Fox today, the reason is simple. The old image sold allure, while the woman standing there now projects control. Garcelle Beauvais. In the 1990s, Garcelle Beauvais had the kind of beauty that read as sleek, worldly, and instantly polished. Whether audiences knew her from The Jamie Foxx Show, NYPD Blue, or later from Coming to America and Spider-Man Homecoming, she carried herself with a cool, camera-ready ease that made her feel effortlessly glamorous. For many viewers, that is still the version lodged in memory. The poised actress with a model's face and the bright, unshakable smile. What changed over time was not simply her age, but the way she stepped into public life. In 2020, Beauvais became the first Black cast member on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, and that move reshaped how people saw her. She was no longer just a beautiful actress from film and television. She became a woman navigating race, friendship, aging, motherhood, and visibility in one of reality TV's most scrutinized spaces. Then in 2025, she walked away from the show after 5 seasons, saying she wanted to spend more time with her sons and focus on the next chapter of her life. That decision made the contrast even sharper. The old image was pure polish. The newer one is much more self-protected and self-authored. When you picture Garcelle now, do you still see the glamorous actress first, or the woman who chose peace over exposure? That may be the real reason some people feel they can't recognize Garcelle Beauvais today. At 59, she has spoken openly about boundaries, self-care, and putting herself first. And in 2026, she returned to Lifetime in Tempted to Love as both actress and executive producer. The glamour is still there, but it is quieter now, less about being looked at and more about deciding exactly how she wants to be seen. Tisha Campbell. Back in the 1990s, Tisha Campbell had a look and rhythm that made sitcom stardom feel effortless. On Martin, she was funny, stylish, fast on her feet, and instantly memorable as Gina. Then My Wife and Kids gave her a second life on television, proving that her appeal was not tied to one decade or one role. For many viewers, that is still the Tisha Campbell, fixed in memory, youthful, expressive, and full of spark. What makes her feel different now is not that the charm disappeared. It is that life has added a layer the camera did not show before. In the years after her divorce from Dwayne Martin, the public began to see a version of Campbell shaped by survival, rather than sitcom brightness alone. The details of that chapter, the separation, the financial stress, the rebuilding changed the way many people read her presence. She no longer came across as only the quick, lovable television favorite. There was more history in her face, more wear in the story, and more intention in how she moved through public life. When you think of Tisha Campbell now, do you still hear Gina's voice first? That question gets to the center of her transformation. As of 2026, Campbell is still working with recent projects, including Operation Aunties in 2025 and Be Happy in 2026. But her public image has widened far beyond acting alone. A recent People exclusive revealed her upcoming memoir. The A Word, A Mother's Journey Through Autism and Love focused on raising her son, Sen, and the emotional path that shaped her as a parent and advocate. That changes the picture completely. The old image was energy. The newer one is endurance. She still has the same recognizable spark, but now it arrives with a lived-in gravity that makes the woman of today feel very different from the sitcom star many people remember. Kim Fields. For millions of viewers, Kim Fields will always be connected to two unforgettable television eras. First, she was Tootie on The Facts of Life, the wisecracking teenager with roller skates and huge personality. Later on, living single, she became Regine Hunter, stylish, funny, and impossible to miss. In both roles, Fields had a brightness that made her instantly lovable. Not the distant glamour of a traditional movie star, but the kind of charm that settles into people's memory for decades. That is the version many fans still hold on to when they hear her name. What makes her feel so different today is that the public no longer meets her mainly as the young performer they remember. Over time, Fields moved into a quieter, steadier phase of life, one shaped as much by longevity as by fame. In earlier reflections on more than 40 years in show business, she spoke about marriage, divorce, motherhood, and a dark period that became part of her story after childhood success. That history matters because it changed the way she carries herself. The playful energy is still there, but now it sits inside someone who seems far less interested in being frozen in an old image. When you picture Kim Fields, now, do you still see Tootie first? That question reveals the whole transformation. As of 2026, Fields is still visible through The Upshaws, whose final season premiered on Netflix on January 15, 2026, but she now reads less like a nostalgic tea favorite and more like a woman who has outlasted several versions of herself. She also stepped into wellness and lifestyle work through her signature blends brand, adding another layer to how she is seen publicly. So if some viewers feel they barely recognize Kim Fields today, the reason is simple. The little girl familiarity of the old image has given way to maturity, composure, and the calm assurance of someone who has been growing in public for nearly her entire life. Jasmine Guy. For anyone who came of age with late 1980s television, Jasmine Guy once represented a very specific kind of elegance, sharp, stylish, witty, and completely unforgettable. As Whitley Gilbert on A Different World, she turned a privileged Southern belle into one of the most iconic black female characters in TV history. She was beautiful in a way that felt crisp and theatrical, all posture, diction, and attitude. And for many viewers, that image never really left. What changed is that the public memory of Jasmine Guy stayed locked in that era, while her real life moved in a different direction. Instead of chasing the same type of visibility, she drifted toward a quieter, more layered path. stage work, directing, writing, selective screen roles, and motherhood. Her 2008 divorce from Terrence Duckett also marked a private shift away from the glossy sitcom image people once attached to her. Over time, she stopped reading like a frozen TV fantasy and started feeling more like a working artist who had stepped outside the machine that first made her famous. When you picture Jasmine Guy now, do you still see Whitley first? That is where the transformation becomes most striking. As of 2026, Jasmine Guy is re-entering public view through the newly announced A Different World sequel for Netflix, with filming set for 2026, and Guy returning alongside Kadeem Hardison, Cree Summer, and Daryl M. Bell. But the woman coming back is no longer the sparkling college queen audiences remember. She carries a calmer authority now, less sparkle for the room, more depth behind the eyes. That is why some viewers may feel they hardly recognize her today. The old image was built on charm and performance. The woman standing there now feels shaped by time, art, and a life lived well beyond the part that made her famous. Phylicia Rashad. For many viewers, Phylicia Rashad will always be the picture of composed black elegance. On The Cosby Show, she was Claire Huxtable, graceful, intelligent, beautifully dressed, and so polished that she became the standard by which many television mothers were measured. That image lasted for decades because it was bigger than a sitcom role. Rashad seemed to embody a kind of beauty that looked effortless, educated, and completely in control. What makes her feel so different today is that the public no longer mainly sees her as the woman at the center of a perfect TV household. Over time, her image shifted away from glossy primetime familiarity and towards something more dignified and institutional. She became Dean of Howard University's Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts in 2021, then stepped down in 2024, and later held the title of Dean Emerita. By 2025 and 2026, her public presence was tied as much to mentorship theater and artistic leadership as to acting itself. She directed Brandon Jacobs Jenkins's Purpose on Broadway in 2025, her Broadway directing debut, and Howard highlighted her continuing role in creative and academic work in 2026. When you picture Phylicia Rashad now, do you still see Claire Huxtable first? That may be why she fits this title so well. She is still unmistakably herself, but the energy is no longer that of a beloved sitcom beauty, frozen in memory. It is the presence of a woman who has moved from icon to elder stateswoman, less television fantasy, more cultural authority. Regina Hall. At the start of the 2000s, Regina Hall had a kind of beauty that felt mischievous, quick, and impossible to miss. In Scary Movie, she turned Brenda into one of the most memorable comic characters of that era, and later films like The Best Man and Girls Trip showed that her appeal was never just about being funny. She had sharp timing, a polished look, and the kind of effortless glamour that made her feel both approachable and unforgettable. For many viewers, that is still the Regina Hall fixed in memory, playful, bright, and always one beat ahead of everyone else on screen. What makes her feel so different now is not some dramatic scandal or disappearance. It is evolution. Over time, Hall moved away from being seen mainly as the witty scene stealer and into a more refined, steady, almost elegant phase of stardom. By 2025, she was talking about Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another, a larger, more serious project, opposite Leonardo DiCaprio, while also preparing to return as Brenda in Scary Movie 6. That combination says a lot. The woman audiences once knew for fast, irreverent comedy now carries herself with the poise of someone who has lasted long enough to choose her own balance between nostalgia and prestige. When you picture Regina Hall, now do you still see Brenda first? That question captures the shift perfectly. As of 2026, Regina Hall still looks striking, but the energy around her has changed. The old image was all spark and comic momentum. The current one feels calmer, more assured, and far more layered. That is why some viewers may feel they barely recognize her today. She did not lose what made her captivating. She simply grew into a version of herself that carries the same beauty with much more weight behind it. Pam Grier. In the 1970s, Pam Grier did not enter Hollywood as a conventional beauty. She arrived as a force. In films like Coffee and Foxy Brown, her face body language and fearless screen presence created a new kind of female icon. One who looked glamorous but also dangerous, self-possessed, and completely in charge. For many viewers, that is still the Pam Grier fixed in memory, all-attitude movement, and cinematic electricity. What makes her feel so different now is that the public no longer encounters her as a rebellious fantasy. Time has turned that same image into something almost mythic. In recent interviews, Grier has spoken about still dealing with injuries from Foxy Brown 50 years later because she performed her own stunts without a double. That detail changes the old picture. The woman audiences once saw as effortlessly powerful was paying a physical price the whole time. It adds gravity to the legend. When you picture Pam Grier, now, do you still see the action heroine first? As of 2026, Grier's appeal feels less explosive and more enduring. In 2024, Variety reported that Village Roadshow was developing a project based on her memoir, Foxy: My Life in 3 Acts. And in 2025, she was still reflecting publicly on the complicated legacy of the blaxploitation label and the barriers she helped break. So if some viewers feel they hardly recognize Pam Grier today, it is not because her magnetism vanished. It is because the woman once seen as pure screen heat now carries the aura of a trailblazer who survived the industry, the injuries, and the decades that followed. The old image promised danger. The woman standing there now suggests history. Lisa Bonet. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Lisa Bonet had a kind of beauty that felt almost untouchable. As Denise Huxtable on The Cosby Show, and later, A Different World, she gave off something rarer than simple prettiness, mystery. Then, Angel Heart shattered the safe television image and made her seem even more unpredictable. For many viewers, that is still the Lisa Bonet. They remember first young bohemian, rebellious, and impossible to place inside Hollywood's usual rules. What changed was not just time, but withdrawal. Bonet never chased visibility the way many stars of her era did. Her first marriage to Lenny Kravitz ended in 1993, though the two remained close and continued raising Zoe together. Years later, her long relationship with Jason Momoa gave the public a second version of Lisa Bonet to hold on to, older, quieter, but still somehow mythic. Then that chapter ended too. Bonet filed for divorce in January 2024, and the split was finalized in July 2024, after years of separation. When you picture Lisa Bonet now, do you still see Denise first? That may be the real shift. As of 2026, Bonet feels less like a celebrity and more like a memory that never fully left the culture. She appears so rarely and so selectively that the old image has had decades to harden in people's minds. So when they see her now, the surprise is not that she looks different, it is that she never became ordinary. The wild, luminous girl from television grew into a woman even more private and harder to define, and that distance is exactly what keeps her fascinating. Sanaa Lathan. At the turn of the 2000s, Sanaa Lathan carried a kind of beauty that felt smooth, self-possessed, and almost effortless. In love and basketball, she became the face of a very specific memory for a lot of viewers. Intelligent, sensual, athletic, and emotionally grounded all at once. Add the Best Man films to that image, and she came to represent a polished kind of screen allure that did not need noise to hold attention. Even now, for many people, the Sanaa Lathan they remember first is still Monica Wright, poised, expressive, and impossible to separate from the romance of that era. What shifted her image was not a dramatic career collapse, but a strange collision between elegance and internet culture. In 2018, the bizarre rumor that she had bitten Beyoncé at a party spread everywhere. And although Lathan denied it, joking that if I did, it would have been a love bite, the story attached itself to her name in a way that felt wildly out of step with the composed image audiences had known for years. That kind of rumor changes perception. It does not erase beauty, but it can distort it, replacing an old public memory with something far more chaotic and harder to control. When you picture Sanaa Lathan, now, do you still see the love and basketball version first? That is where the transformation becomes most interesting. As of 2026, Lathan feels less like a romantic screen fantasy and more like a creative figure shaping her own lane. She directed On the Come Up and is set to star in and executive produce a drama series about Miss Cleo, which points to a career no longer centered only on being looked at. So if some viewers feel they barely recognize Sanaa Lathan today, it may be because the woman once remembered mainly for elegance now carries a far more layered kind of presence, one shaped by longevity, authorship, and a public image the internet once tried to rewrite. Rosario Dawson. In the late 1990s and 2000s, Rosario Dawson had a kind of beauty that felt cinematic from the very beginning. She did not rise through one carefully manufactured image. She arrived with intensity. From Kids to He Got Game, then later Rent and Sin City. Dawson became the kind of actress audiences remembered for her eyes, her stillness, and the way she could look both grounded and dangerous at the same time. For many viewers, that is still the Rosario Dawson they picture, first youthful, striking, and unmistakably a film actress. What makes her feel different today is that her public identity no longer belongs to the screen alone. Over time, Dawson's image expanded into something much broader. Part actress, part activist, part producer, part civic voice. She co-founded Voto Latino, has remained visible in major voter engagement campaigns, and has also been publicly recognized for advocacy work beyond entertainment. That shift matters because it changes the way the public reads her. The old image was pure movie presence. The newer one carries purpose politics and a much stronger sense of mission. When you picture Rosario Dawson now, do you still see the film star first? That question captures exactly why she belongs on this list. As of 2026, Dawson still looks compelling, but the energy around her has changed. She remains tied to high-profile roles like Ahsoka Tano, with Ahsoka Season 2 expected on Disney Plus in 2026. Yet she also feels far less defined by old Hollywood fantasy than she once did. So if some viewers feel they can't recognize Rosario Dawson today, it is not because her beauty disappeared. It is because the woman once remembered mainly for screen magnetism now stands for something larger. She no longer feels like a star being watched from a distance. She feels like a figure who stepped out of the frame and into real life without losing any of the power that first made people look twice. Thandiwe Newton. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Thandiwe Newton had a kind of beauty that felt almost cinematic, in the purest sense delicate, luminous, and a little hard to read. In films like beloved Mission Impossible 2 and later Crash, she carried an elegance that seemed both fragile and intensely self-possessed. For many viewers, that is still the version they remember first. The young actress with striking features, quiet intensity, and the kind of screen presence that made her feel instantly distinctive. What changed over time was not merely age, it was reclamation. In 2021, she publicly restored the original Zulu spelling of her name, shifting from Thandi back to Thandiwe, a move that signaled something much larger than branding. It was a correction of identity, a way of taking back something that had been altered for the comfort of others. That decision came after years in which Newton had already spoken openly about abuse, exploitation, race, and the ways Hollywood had shaped how she was seen. The result is that the public no longer looks at her only as a beautiful actress from major films. They see a woman who has spent years peeling away the distortions around her image. When you picture Thandiwe Newton, now, do you still see the young movie star first? That question is what makes her such a fitting final name on this list. As of 2026, Newton still looks arresting, but the effect is very different. She feels sharper, more inward, and far less interested in being consumed as an image. With a new high-profile film role in Tom Ford's Cry to Heaven, slated for late 2026, she remains visible but no longer in the same register the public once held on to. So if some viewers feel they can hardly recognize Thandiwe Newton today, The reason is not that time erased her. It is that she has spent years reclaiming who she is, and that changes the way a face is seen. The old image invited fascination. The woman standing there now demands understanding. So maybe the real question is not whether these women changed. Of course they did. The real question is this: did time transform them? Or did the public simply refuse to grow beyond the image it first fell in love with? Some of these actresses look different because life changed them. Others feel unfamiliar because Hollywood fame and memory froze them in one era and never updated the picture. That is what makes this list so fascinating. Tell us in the comments which transformation surprised you most. And for more powerful stories about beauty, fame, and legacy, follow and subscribe to Black Legends Revealed.